Saint Carlo Borromeo is the embodiment of true reform. It can be said that Carlo literally reconstructed the church that was close to collapse in Milan and its surroundings. Carlo was also the soul of the Council of Trent. The saint worked towards not only the renewal of the church structure, but also of spiritual life. That is why Tridentinum also created the conditions for holiness. The exact opposite of Tridentinum is Vaticanum II. This truth is being publicly revealed today by the other Carlo, Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò. Tridentinum led to the reform of the Church, but Vaticanum II led to deformation and transformation of the Church into a New Age antichurch. Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò exposes the manipulation and fraud of the Freemasons, as well as the entire coup system within the Catholic Church. Traitors of Christ have been placed in key positions, acting in God's authority and demanding obedience. For 60 years after the Council, it was impossible to point to this truth. Now, the time is ripe. Bergoglio's provocative change of paradigms and proclamation of a sodomite anti-gospel is an eye-opener for many sincere Catholics. They begin to see that whoever submits in obedience to this public arch-heretic finds himself in the pseudo-church of the Antichrist, which has nothing to do with Christ. Bergoglio's antichurch is the opium of the people. Lenin's term for false religion fully describes its character. In his answers to questions from the Catholic media, Archbishop Viganò clarifies the essence of the problem.
Archbishop Viganò, in your new statement you distinguish the conciliar church from the Catholic Church in such a way that you assert there are two churches certainly, whereas in the past you have affirmed, obviously there are not two churches, something that would be impossible, blasphemous and heretical. Thus it seems your position has changed. Do you now hold that the conciliar church is completely separate from the Catholic Church, rather than a subversive sect that exists within the true church?
My position has not changed. There is only one true church, and that is the Roman Catholic Apostolic Church. But there are in fact two superimposed realities, so to speak, one of which is the true church precisely, and the other is the false church, the deep church.
What is new in this sect compared to others that in the course of history have questioned the dogmas of the Church?
The Church has been confronted with 1,000 heresies over the centuries. Heretics have always claimed to have discovered true doctrine and accused the Church of having erred, withdrawing from her authority. The Church, for her part, condemned heresy, and heretics were removed from the ecclesial body. They continued to do damage, but at least their separation from the Catholic Church was clear, and the faithful kept away from them. This time, however, we have heretics and apostates who knew that if they separated themselves from the Church of Rome, they would meet the miserable end of all heresiarchs. They have therefore organized themselves so that they are at the head of the Church, so that they can promulgate heresy from the See of Peter by imposing it as a truth to be believed by virtue of the authority of the Roman pontiff, and so that they can silence every voice of dissent with canonical sanctions and excommunications, and at the same time use pulpits, episcopal sees, seminaries and universities to systematically spread error. Previously, one could turn to the Holy See to settle doctrinal and disciplinary questions, while today it is the Holy See itself that is the institutional instrument of the heretics who have occupied it. Evidence of this is so-called doctrinal documents signed by Bergoglio, such as Fiducia Supplicans on the blessing of sodomite unions. Just as also happens in the civil sphere, in the face of blatant violations of the law by the authority, it is impossible to obtain justice from the same corrupt authority which avails itself of the complicity of all the administrative and judicial bodies that make its action possible. In theory, that authority has been usurped and is null, but de facto, it acts undisturbed in its power. It is necessary to take note of the usurpation of the Apostolic See, which is not merely vacant, but occupied, in order to put an end to a very serious situation, without forgetting that Bergoglio's illegitimacy also entails the nullity of all the acts of governance and magisterium that he has carried out, erasing 11 years of errors and horrors. The Archbishop goes on to state why many recognize an invalid Pope. The reason is either their complicity in betrayal or their unwillingness to accept the necessary consequences. In other words, they refuse true repentance, the means of saving the Church. In particular, they do not want to take the step of separating themselves and their dioceses from Bergoglio's antichurch, which has officially adhered to different paradigms and a different gospel and anti-gospel since the end of 2023. But this ecclesial coup and transformation into an anti-church has its roots in the Second Vatican Council. Those who recognize that Bergoglio's authority is valid and legitimate either do so because they are his accomplices and do not want to be discovered in their own betrayal, or because they do not want to accept the necessary consequences that derive from it. First and foremost, to acknowledge that this coup d'état began with the Second Vatican Council. Admitting that one has fallen into a terrible deception requires first of all humility, and so far no one among cardinals and bishops has had the courage to recognize that the Catholic Church has been hostage to heretics for decades, and that these heretics have humiliated and discredited her before the world precisely in order to deprive her of authority.
Does all of this follow a precise pattern or plan?
Certainly. The modus operandi is the same that Freemasonry uses to delegitimize governments and appropriate national sovereignty. First, the lodges undermine the professional and moral training of the future ruling class. Then they corrupt these largely incompetent politicians, causing their scandals to discredit themselves and the institution they preside over. Then they point to the corruption of politics and institutions in order to privatize public services with enormous profits. And finally, they hire corrupt politicians to work in their companies or foundations so as to continue maneuvering them. By analogy, the Archbishop points out two means that contributed to the adoption of destructive changes in faith and morals after Vatican II. These means are moral corruption and the heretical formation of the clergy. In the Catholic Church, too, moral corruption and the heretical formation of the clergy have been instrumental in the acceptance of changes in doctrinal, moral, and liturgical matters. But when the bond of complicity that inextricably binds the deep state and the deep church is soon brought to light, the horror that surrounds these criminals will be such as to constitute a real apocalypse in the etymological sense of the term, that is, unveiling revelation. Using the analogy of the deep state, Archbishop Viganò explains the existence of the deep church and at the same time shows that the deep church and the deep state form an inseparable unity. People already have the experience of a government they elected going against the nation after the election, and they immediately recognize it. But the fact that a similar betrayal is in the Church is something Catholics are unable to accept, but it is a harsh reality.
You have often observed that there is a parallel between what happens in the civil world and in the Church.
In the civil sphere, we are witnessing a coup d'état organized by a subversive lobby, in which the heads of government, ministers and state officials, who are supposed to be the representatives of the citizens, act against the interests of the peoples for the benefit of the lobby that appointed them. Are they civil servants? Yes. Are they traitors? Yes. They should not be in a normal world. But in fact, those who hold authority in the state are almost everywhere subservient to an enemy force that has infiltrated the structure of authority to use it to its own advantage and destroy it. Are they two states? No. One is the state, the other is the deep state. It's counterfeiting, which precisely as such manages to act and be obeyed. We are faced with the same situation in the ecclesiastical sphere. The same Masonic lobby that for over 2 centuries has systematically demolished civil governments has managed to penetrate the Catholic Church, to appoint its own emissaries, to progressively eliminate all internal opposition, and to impose a series of radical changes that subvert the magisterial teaching of 2000 years. The purpose of these 5th columns has been to appropriate the authority of the Church in order to demolish it from within, using the force of the law for the opposite purpose to that which legitimizes it. Are they 2 churches? Of course not. One is the true church, the other is the deep church. That is its counterfeit, the counter-church, the antichurch of the Antichrist. Next, Archbishop Viganò quotes a well-known American archbishop who gave a prophecy about a false prophet long before the false prophet Jorge Bergoglio took over the church. the Archbishop speaks of the mystical body of the Antichrist. It is Bergoglio's current antichurch since the transformation of the Catholic Church, which took place with the release of the so-called doctrinal declaration Fiducia Supplicans on the 18th of December 2023. Archbishop Fulton Sheen wrote, "The false prophet will have a religion without a cross, a religion without a world to come, a religion to destroy religions. There will be a counterfeit church. The Church of Christ, Catholic Church, will be one, and the false prophet will create another. The false church will be worldly, ecumenical, and global. It will be a federation of churches, and religions will form a certain kind of global association, a world parliament of churches. It will be emptied of all divine content and will be the mystical body of the Antichrist. The mystical body on earth today will have its Judas Iscariot, and it will be the false prophet. Satan will bring him in among our bishops." Saint Carlo Borromeo worked diligently on the internal renewal of the entrusted archdiocese. He often climbed the mountains on foot to save souls in abandoned settlements. During the plague, he risked his life and prepared the dying for death. An unsuccessful assassination attempt was made on him for his efforts for the internal revival of the Church. When the proceedings of the Council of Trent reached a moment of crisis, it was Carlo who exerted all his energies to see the Council complete its revival work. Today, the bearer of his name, Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò, follows in the footsteps of this great saint. He has courageously stood up for Christ and his Church. 6 years ago, he called for the abdication of the illegitimate Pope, who is destroying the fundamental pillars of the faith. In turn, this arch-heretic, before whom all tremble, as before the evil Herod, repaid him with persecution, slander, and tragicomic excommunication. Saint Carlo Borromeo, both in times of plague and in difficult situations, set an example for the bishops to cast aside fear and follow him. May even today true bishops cast aside their fear of the arch-heretic Bergoglio and follow the brave arch-shepherd Carlo Maria Viganò in fidelity to Christ.